In this episode, I speak with Head of Nutrition at the Clear Health Program based out of the Netherlands, Jim Leseman. Key points addressed were Jim's extensive personal biohacking history with fasting and the various health discoveries he's made within that past. We also discussed the differences and similarities in fasting communities in the USA and the Netherlands, as well as how the startup, the Clear Health Program, incorporates core tenets of intermittent fasting in educating their clients seeking greater health both mentally and physically. Stay tuned for my fascinating talk with Jim Leseman. My name is Patricia Kathleen, and this series features interviews and conversations I conduct with experts from medicine and science to health and humanitarian arenas in an effort to explore the world of fasting from a variety of angles. This dialogue is meant to develop a more complete story about the information, research, personal stories, and culture in and around the science and lifestyle of fasting. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to check out our subsequent series that dive deep into specific areas such as founders and entrepreneurs, vegan life, and roundtable topics. They can be found on our website, patriciakathleen.com, where you can also join our newsletter. You can also subscribe to all of our series on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, and YouTube. Thanks for listening. Now let's start the conversation. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I am your host, Patricia, and today I'm excited to be sitting down with Jim Leseman. He is the head of nutrition at the Clear Health Program. You can find out more on their website, www.theclearhealthprogram.com, as well as his personal site on www.ketoking.nl. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you for having me, Patricia. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it as well. I can't wait to kind of unpack a lot of the different facets that your expertise speaks to. For those of you that are new to the program, I will read a quick bio on Jim before I start peppering him with questions. But prior to that, a roadmap in which the line of inquiry that today's podcast will follow. We'll first ask Jim to fully unpack his personal and professional history with fasting. Then we'll turn straight to unpacking terms. I'll ask Jim to define terms that seem rote and simple in the fasting industry, but actually everyone has a unique definition and relationship with them. We'll then turn to specific questions that Jim can speak to in regards to his expertise, his current employment, and also his previous personal history with fasting. And I'll wrap everything up with rapid fire questions for those of you that have written in that we have assigned towards Jim, as his expertise speaks best in answering some of those questions. So as promised, a quick bio on Jim before I start peppering him with inquiry. He first became interested in food, lifestyle, and fasting after experiencing issues like fatigue, weight gain, and other health conditions. Jim started reading academic articles, following online YouTube content, and reading books on the subject matter of fasting. After his firsthand experience of fasting, intermittent fasting, and the right foods, learning what the right foods are, and just like we were all taught many years ago, real medicine, he decided to share his experiences by setting up a Dutch blog, Keto King. Eventually, he switched jobs and started working for an Amsterdam-based startup where he used data technology and cutting-edge science to help people improve their health and well-being. There, he shares his experience and knowledge on intermittent fasting, that helps many participants improve their life. So I can't wait to climb through some of that. But before we get to that, Jim, I'm hoping you can kind of draw a narrative or a story of how your fasting career began and how it's changed since then.
Yeah, of course, Patricia. So I think the best is to go back quite some time, actually, when I was about a year of 10 years old. And actually at that time, I started experience all kinds of health-related issues like fatigue, like rashes, like acne. And actually, I didn't know what to do about it. It was in the beginning of the 90s, and the only thing you can do actually is go to your GP. You go to your doctor to ask what to do about it. And these are, of course, the olden days where we didn't have the internet and the good books to educate you. So basically, I get a lotion or a potion to put on the places that were itchy, for instance. The thing that was going on just vanished at the moment. All good, all clear. And then, of course, later on, everything started all over again. And throughout the entire early adulthood, I was swinging a bit in weight. I was gaining a couple of pounds, I was losing some pounds, and I couldn't actually put my finger on it, what was causing it. And yeah, basically, it took, I think, fast forward 4 years ago, that I was really investigating a bit more how it works with diets. Basically, it started with a book being written by a Belgian doctor, which is called the food, sort of food pyramid kind of book, food hourglass, you can call it. And it explained that this diet we're all following, you could say the standard American diet, but we have, of course, an equivalent in the Netherlands on that, is not the kind of diet that would be too healthy to most educated individuals. So it's lots of sugars, lots of refined grains, and basically that's the life I was living. Lots of snacking, lots of eating white rice, white pasta, and so on. So this book taught me actually two things. On one thing, try to eat real foods, whole foods. So indeed, I was switching in eating more vegetables, for instance, instead of just all the pre-packaged stuff. Besides that, it also taught me that you should not eat every 2 or 3 hours. And that's basically the advice you often get. That's what you learn from maybe your parents or maybe from a dietitian, some dietitians, let's say, that you should continuously eat throughout the day. And reading this book, I thought, hey, this is pretty weird, you know. So our ancestors had to go without food for, let's say, sometimes 5 days. Then we had to hunt an animal, or we had to gather some foods, and we were still coping with it. And now it seems that we cannot go with 3 hours without food, and that's also the way I felt. So this is actually the way I started. First by strictly eating 3 times per day, and that's really did a lot to me, good stuff. It really improved my body. It's improved my weight, actually. I lost a couple of pounds, and I was becoming more fitter. I didn't experience so much fatigue anymore. So the second edition of this book actually describes a bit more about fasting. And this is actually the first time I was reading about this. So again, this is about 4 years ago from now. And one of the things that was being taught there is to try out intermittent fasting. And it's the first time actually I got in contact with it. And it seems to be an easy solution. I can remember that I in the past tried a 24 hours fast, but that didn't go so well. Perhaps because I was not on the right diet also. I was eating lots of bad stuff, and then doing a 24 hours fast is pretty difficult, I found out. And so I was incorporating intermittent fasting every now and then. And basically the first time was pretty hard. I was hungry in the morning, was a bit grumpy, I would say. But eventually I thought this is going on the right track. And it led to a different eating habit where I was doing intermittent fasting every day and just doing the 2 meals per day with the lunch and the dinner. And this is basically something that I'm still doing today. And that's really improved lots of my health-related issues. Of course, I was deep diving a bit more because I was curious. I was deep diving more in the literature, what literature I had to say about it. I was watching a lot of YouTube content, and then especially on doctors that are also practicing fasting techniques. And that actually was the born, I would say, of me, in which I became more or less of a biohacker, where I would draft many experiments, and one of them is indeed doing fasts. And that really, got my interest in the subject matter.
Absolutely.
So soon after, actually, I did a 72 hours fast. And that actually went pretty well. And I found out actually that this is something my body craves. This is something my body every now and then needs.
Excellent. I'm wondering, when did you end with, the last stage was the 72 hour, or have you kind of played around more with it?
Yeah, good question. So I played around a bit more with it. So I didn't extend it even more than 72 hours. I thought that would be the max. Also, looking at the literature, it sort of writes, even though we don't know everything about it yet, that the most benefits flow away a bit after those 72 hours in terms of autophagy, for instance. So I thought 72 hours is the max, maybe also to combine that with my personal life, because it might be a bit weird with my family to not eat entirely. But I was playing around with different types of fasting. So I did 24 hours of fasting and I did 48 hours of fasting. Basically, I like that one the best, the 48 hours fasting, because you get many benefits of the extended fasting. And it's still pretty doable. You don't need to skip your social life, so to say, when you do an extended fast. Besides that, I also played around a bit with 1 meal per day.
All right. So let's get into some terms. You've dropped several of them here, which is exciting. The first term I want you to kind of define, and these are meant to be just as you define them personally to yourself, not necessarily the dictionary or health terminology, but when these terms are conjured up in your head, what you think of when you think of them. The first one is simple, is fasting. What does this term mean to you?
Yeah, to me, it's a period of simply not eating at all. So I'm not counting any, almost no calories in there. So I'm also not considering using juices, for instance, to be really fasting. So for me, it's indeed going an extended period without food and only drinking water and tea, coffee are allowed, I would say.
Okay, so it's a complete lack of calories with both food and drink.
Yeah.
Okay. And how do you define the term intermittent fasting?
Yeah. So intermittent fasting is, to me, a period that's not an extended fast, of course, so not a 24 hours fast, but everything lower than 24 hours. So if I'm talking about intermittent fasting, I mostly refer to the 16 and 8 method, in which you have an eating window of 8 hours, let's say between 12 o'clock at noon till 8 o'clock in the evening, and the rest of it, including the sleep, is actually the time you fast.
Okay. And as in regards to intermittent fasting, you said everything less than a 24-hour fast. How do you define OMAD, 1 meal a day fasting, in relationship to your 24-hour fast? Are they the same thing for you?
Yeah, basically they are. So indeed, if in the period I was applying OMAD, it was more or less on a day, a span of 24 hours, that I reserved a slot of 2 hours in which I was eating.
Okay, so it's a span of 2 hours, so you could potentially have more than one meal and still do OMAD, but it had to be within the consecutive 2-hour eating window.
Correct.
Okay. And how do you define autophagy?
So autophagy to me is the process in your body where it recycles all the stuff that's being left behind. So we're talking about damaged cell material, and this is the process that to me kicks in not when doing intermittent fasting, but doing an extended fast. So after the 24 hours, that's what I read mostly about literature. Then the real effects of autophagy kick in. Basically, I see it as a cleansing of the body, in which parts of cells that are broken are being either recycled or excreted by the body.
Okay. And because of your history and some of your other work, how do you define ketosis?
Ketosis is the state to me in which there's a lack of sugar and glycogen. So with glycogen, I refer to the stored sugar in your liver mainly. It's also partly stored in your muscles. But basically, when this source of energy is depleted, most of the time ketosis will kick in because you're going to switch to a different metabolic state in which you're not using glucose or sugar as a means to get energy, but actually the ketones, so the stored fat.
Absolutely. And there's some terms in here. I'm not sure if you've heard them or if you use them, so I'm just going to kind of prattle them off and see. Have you heard of and do you use the term warrior diet?
I've heard about it, and I read about it a long time ago. I think it has to do with doing a fast in which certain liquids are allowed, like juices, like bone broth. But I don't know exactly the rules of that type of diet.
Sure, no problem. And then finally, you use this word biohacker. What does that mean for you as you've applied it to your life?
Yeah, so it means to measure certain responses of your body and to make actionable insights from it. The idea of biohacking is that you do some kind of intervention, meaning that you're going to change an eating pattern, an eating habits, but possibly also use an external device to measure something in your body. But it's only being called biohacking to me when you also use these insights to do something with it.
Yeah, and I want to drive straight from there into one of our rapid fire questions. We're going to drop around a little bit. And one of the main questions that people have for people like yourself who have taken a great scientific interest in combining that with fasting is which tools do you use for measuring levels of glucose, ketones, or other biological aspects that change during fasting? And if so, what information are you looking for when you're doing that? What kind of calibration are you trying to achieve as you use those tools?
Yeah, so I do make use of blood sugar monitoring. And what I prefer the most is the continuous blood sugar monitoring. Those are the devices also being used by diabetic patients. And the neat thing about this is that it tracks continuously your food. And it's not the perfect way to see if you're in ketosis, but it is a good way to see to what extent are you actually most likely burning fat for fuel, because you can see that to what extent you're leveling, you're very flat in your response if you look at your blood sugar level. And I experience on the times I simply don't eat that my blood sugar levels are perfectly stable. We make use of millimole per liter in the Netherlands. So I reckon it's about 100 milligram per deciliter in the US. And basically, when you stay stable around that moment, also it is associated to me, let's say, with a great amount of energy. So avoiding all the peaks and the dips you might have, the sugar cravings and the after dinner dip, the infamous after dinner dip. Those things I could easily spot in that data and pinpoint it back to what I actually ate, so I can optimize that. So basically, I didn't find a perfect tool to measure ketones. I used the keto strips with urine. Those really help when you just start, for instance, the ketogenic diet. But when you do fasting and keto for a longer period of time, you don't excrete so many ketones by urine, so it's not the best method to see it. So here in the Netherlands, we don't have many of those breathalyzer tests that could also do this. I tried out a couple of them, but they are a bit flaky in their response. So I'm investigating that a bit more.
Interesting. Yeah, they're getting a lot of hype now in the U.S., but I'm not sure. I think the verdict's still out as to their utility and accuracy. Another question we have people write in regarding biohackers like yourself is that do you find that your readings coincide with your feelings all of the time, or are there times when you're feeling fine and some of your blood sugar readings are off?
Yeah. So in the beginning, it was a bit more cherry picking also in the literature. So indeed, one good example is that I really enjoyed coffee a lot. So I was looking in the literature to sort of say that coffee is good for you. But
Yeah.
all the time I was not feeling too well after a cup of coffee, especially when I combined it with intermittent fasting. Yeah, drinking coffee in a fasted state didn't work out to me. So this is also to me something I consider to do to be part of the biohacking, where I simply do this test where I do like 1 month without coffee. I'm now in for 3 weeks. The first days were tough. Really, the symptoms of withdrawal happens. But these are the experiments I'm also drafting in here.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to turn now to some of your work that you've done. I want to personally start with the Keto King work. It sounds like that came first prior to you taking your head of nutrition at the Clear Health program. What made you start? Was it a blog that you started off with, and what had you starting this?
Yeah. So indeed, Keto King is my personal blog. And the funny thing actually is I started this because I had all kinds of recipes that worked out pretty well for me. I really enjoy cooking, and I didn't have a place to store all those recipes. So I was looking around in apps. I was trying to put it in a spreadsheet, but nothing actually works out for the entire family because my wife also wants to see them, obviously. So I thought, why not create a blog with at the first stage the sole purpose to serve me, to make sure that I have an overview of all the recipes. So that was actually the first version of this website. Then I found out that actually people were also visiting my own personal cook book, let's say. So I thought, hey, why not do something more with this? And also my wife, who is also not a true biohacker, but also experimenting a lot with different diets, and also likes to cook. I like to cook a bit more on like dinner, and she likes to cook more on baking, like cookies and stuff like that, on a healthy way. So we were more or less joining forces in that sense, and we thought, hey, let's make a nice side project of it. And especially because this also provided to me some kind of outlets about all the information I was reading on the internet, everything about fasting, everything about ketosis, and I found out that there's extreme amount of content in the US, but there's not so much good Dutch content on that. And I thought, why not indeed find that niche, to make use of that niche, and to run this blog a bit more professionally, with also some more backside stories, like indeed what is intermittent fasting, how to get into ketosis, what kind of types of extended fastings could you do. So I was writing more and more articles on that, and actually this also did a good thing because people found those articles and are reading them, and I have about 10K of visitors per month, which is for the US not so much, but for the Netherlands, for our hobby projects, it's pretty okay. And I really enjoy doing that, and to have some kind of hobby that is also giving information to the community.
Absolutely. And that kind of drops us into, we had a lot of inquiry with people who have looked at fasting communities globally. And speaking of Europe and the Netherlands in general, people are curious about, so the fasting communities and the online communities, the fasting scenes, given COVID, particularly the online fasting communities. What is the reception like in comparison to the literature that you've read that's based out of the United States? Is the Dutch culture more akin or open to the idea of fasting lifestyles or the dietary, expansions, the health benefits of it? How do you perceive that culturally to be received?
Yeah, good question. So indeed, we have a very open culture in the Netherlands. So everyone that's open to ideas is welcome, and in that sense, this really is a good fertilizer, I would say, for ideas like intermittent fasting and different forms of fasting. So talking about fasting and trying it out is something that's becoming more part and parcel actually in the Netherlands. It's not being adopted a lot by professionals, I would say. There are not so many. So if I'm looking to the US, I'm looking at people like Jason Fung, for instance, who talks a lot about fasting. We don't have like a key player in that sense in the Netherlands, so not a role model on that. And especially when you're looking at the official parties in the Netherlands that are really traditional and really saying, okay, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. So you should never skip it, never skip any meal, actually, never skip snacks. So there's a lot of work to do, I would say, and especially there's not a proper broad community happening at the moment here.
Okay, and when you mentioned earlier the standard Dutch diet in comparison to the standard American diet, can you draw up some similarities and differences? You just mentioned breakfast with this, heralded hierarchy of being the most important meal a day, which I think is being quite dispelled now, at least amongst a lot of the communities in the United States. What are some of the similarities and differences between the standard Dutch versus the standard American diet?
Yeah. So I think the similarity is that there's still a big emphasis on foodstuffs like bread. Bread, and especially refined breads, are in there. It's being said that's important to you. And I think that's the main similarity between both. That's bread and pasta, rice, and things like that take up the majority. And of course, they steal from the other parts of the pyramid, or so to say. So that means that the part of for vegetables, for instance, is smaller in that sense. I do think if I compare it with the standard American diet, that we're in general higher in fruits and vegetables. This is actually a small improvement, I would say, from our measurement or our system throughout the year. So that's the part indeed of eating healthy vegetables and fruits is growing actually. And I think that is something that is different in comparison with the US.
Okay. I want to turn now to your head of nutrition work at the Clear Health program. And I want to ask you to first to kind of describe and define what the Clear Health program is and what your role there as head of nutrition is.
Yeah. So about a year ago, we started with the Clear Health program. So we're basically still a startup, and we're doing this in the field of lifestyle, health, and nutrition. So the idea behind this is basically by one of the founders that was intrigued by a study that was being done in the year 2015. It was a study by Dan Zivi, which is an Israeli researcher. And he actually, for the first time, proved that there's no such thing as the perfect diet for you. Everyone should have his own personalized diet. And that's the concept also that intrigued me, which was also my quest to find out my personal diets, my best personal diets. And basically what this study did in 2015 is to apply blood sugar monitors to healthy individuals, so people not diagnosed with diabetes. And the interesting part is that they respond all very differently to the same type of food. So at the same time of the day, the same type of food is being eaten. So a banana and a cookie and a watermelon, let's say. And certain individuals really spike their blood sugar levels on it, sometimes on the same level as pure glucose. And that is something where we would say that's something definitely to avoid. This is basically making you or turning you into a pre-diabetic. Where others actually have a really good working system where actually nothing is impacting them, and actually their blood sugar levels stay pretty the same throughout the day. So that fascinated us, and we thought maybe we should do something with this in terms of a company, because it can definitely help out the nutritional expert advice to all the clients in here. Because all the different diets they are, and all the nutritional advices by dietitians, you definitely don't know what to eat anymore. So actually we started indeed this concept in September last year. And what we do is we at the moment have a program in which for 2 weeks you're continuously logging your blood sugar monitor. And also for 2 weeks you are also writing down in a food journal what you're exactly eating and drinking and snacking. And we pair those data together. So the literature says that within a time slot of 2 hours, something can happen with your blood sugar levels. It can rise, peak, it might stabilize, whatever. And we pair those data together so we can build your best personal diet. So we can say this bowl of rice, well, maybe you should make the portion in half. This white bread with Nutella, don't eat it ever again. It was really terrible. But this whole grain bread with cheese, perfect response. And this is a nice way actually where you can make small tweaks to your diet without actually jumping into an entirely life-changing diet. So in this period of 2 weeks, I'm the one actually as head of nutrition to aid the people. I'm there to help them out throughout the program. I also am there to give them daily tips and advice on their diets. So they also come to me with food recommendations. So for instance, they cooked a meal with potatoes. They spike in terms of the blood sugar levels on there. So I can advise them to try out some sweet potato instead, because we found out in our data that most people yield better results on that. So I help them throughout the program, and I also debrief them at the end. So they have a clear understanding of what they should eat and what they should avoid. I think, especially now, the cutting edge feature we're building on is an automated food recommender. So of course, I don't want to be the one that is personally saying all the time what they should eat and not eat, but based upon their blood sugar patterns, we could match those data with people like you. And in that sense, we could advise that this certain type of food has a high impact on you, should work pretty well for you. So that's what we currently work on. And to tell you a bit more about our clients, those are mainly entrepreneurs who want more energy. They want sustained energy from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m., let's say. Don't want to have any after dinner dips because they don't perform anymore. But also people like me in the past with all kinds of things like fatigue, like brain fog, and so on, because we can also help them with that. Besides that, also people that are more overweight or obese, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering, so how do you implement elements of components of fasting in regards to your advice and coaching of these as head of nutrition with this 2-week program?
Yeah, good question. So basically, this is one of the things I teach every participant. So you can imagine that we start normally with a group every week. So on Monday, we kick off together with a group and we share some personal stories. And basically, I tell, besides the food part, also a bit about fasting. I explain indeed to the participants that you were probably told to eat multiple times per day, but this might not be good for you because it might hamper your entire system. And that's what we see a lot with our participants, that it really messes with, for instance, insulin resistance. So I explain a bit about the science behind it, and I also invite them to try it out. Because, of course, the cool thing is that you can see in real time what your blood sugar levels are like when you're doing that. What I see sometimes is that people are pretty high in their levels, and those are mainly the people that want to lose some weight. They have an average higher glucose, and they can bring that average down by doing intermittent fasting. And they also really keep track of their energy levels throughout the program. So they also know most of the time when they're doing intermittent fasting that still their energy level is pretty good. Maybe they're a bit hungry in the beginning, but still they have a good sense of energy. So because it's guided and we aid them with this, and we answer all kinds of questions to battle the hunger and how to break a fast, for instance, it's getting part of their toolbox. And most of the time the users, when they are finished with the program, they learned a lot about techniques like fasting or techniques like eating low carb, and they implement that in their life afterwards.
Yeah. I think this is a brilliant way to not to come at it from a monetization standpoint, but, I'm an American. And I think it's a brilliant way to monetize the concept and the philosophy of fasting, and this idea of actually developing archetypes or personality types that deal in subsequent ways or in similar ways with someone else, and developing the next phase of, this community and advisory food groups from that you're going to have with based people. Even the idea of a bespoke dietary plan that varies from individual to individual is definitely where the research is pointing, from Walter Longow to, even some of the old croonies have, research that would point to that is based on fasting and the benefits of it. So I love that kind of compatibility. The last question I have in regards to the Clear Health program is, what is the next phase? Like you talked about having this this index of, of referred foods and things like that people of that genre tend to do well with. What do you foresee moving forward? Because as a startup, you're still in a very exciting trajectory, at least in the States, that is still kind of taking off. Do you have future plans that are playing on what you currently have, or is it too close to the chest to speak about?
Yeah, we're actually now in the moment of planning that to look a bit more further into the future. And so one of the things is that a lot of our current clients really love this concept, but simply to try it out once. So one thing we want to do now is to have more of a subscription model that is helping you out with an extensive
Yeah.
health journey. So that would be, of course, from business perspective, also something we need to do. On the other hand, I think the end game is to become one of the leading health and fitness apps, where we also include different biomarkers. So we want to do everything science-based, so that distinguishes us a bit from the standard food trackers. But I think especially when we can tie in other factors, other biomarkers, maybe ketones indeed, maybe working a bit more towards cholesterol tracking and things like that. That would definitely be something that moves us forward, because that also makes it more interesting for our current clients to every now and then check in again and to review their levels.
Yeah, I think there's argument to be made with the subscription model, at least in regards to women, which I know most about being one, in regards to change of the cycle over the trajectory of childbearing years, post-childbearing years, menopause. It's got to be, I'm saying this without any scientific foundation whatsoever, but intuition simply insists that dietary responses and therefore the most optimal dietary demands would change during those time periods as well. And even monthly, even the time of the month for specific women, the menstrual process and things of that nature. So it sounds like it's really the advantage of the subscription model for this particular product would be ideal. That's exciting. It's exciting for you and the company. I look forward to kind of following it. I want to move forward now and look at some of the rapid fire questions that we have. Everyone who writes in would like us to ask our guests. So the first one is, what kinds of fasting have you tried? You've talked about OMAD, 16-8, 24, and your longest was 72. Have you done anything outside of that?
No, nothing longer than that. I also never actually experimented with types of fast in which you're still allowed to take certain fluids, like broth or like juices. I would be interested to try out the alternate day fasting. So indeed, 1 day of eating, either 2 meals per day or 3 meals per day, and then the day afterwards, absolutely nothing. That's something I didn't experiment with myself and would love to try out.
Yeah, that's one that a lot of people talk about having missed. It tends to be that they get into the longer and longer and don't kind of play around with the rotation. In speaking about Walter Longau and fast mimicking and things of that nature, you haven't played around with this kind of controlled calorie amount and things like that, where he's producing autophagy type results in his work. Have you read any of that work, and are you interested in bringing those core concepts into either something you try out or something that you kind of posture to the Clear Health program?
I actually am not familiar with that.
Okay. It's a big one in the U.S., and I'm never sure which fasting communities have tapped into it. It's mentioned in a few documentaries that hit really big here, and he had a lot of turnaround with, I believe it was cancer patients he was working with, as well as some autoimmune issues, where he had a complete recovery of some cells that were necessary in turning those diseases around. We got into no calorie, and in the United States, it's probably not, hopefully not the same in Amsterdam, but diet sodas are of the largest, heated, most debated. People who monitor, like yourself, their blood sugar levels, will say that you absolutely cannot, because their bodies are responding to it. They're releasing insulin. It's as though they have eaten. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And this is something that I also tracked indeed with our products from the Clear Health program. Also, personally myself, I'm not a big fan of diet sodas. I'm not a big fan of sodas at all. But I found out indeed when diet sodas are drank that it basically drains your blood sugar level. So the rationale, I think, behind it is that your body is expecting sugar to come in. Of course, it's not coming in there because it's aspartame or whatever kind of fake sugar is in there. So your body is producing insulin, and because of that lack of sugar in there, it simply lowers the blood sugar level, with as a result that you get fatigued and get hungry. And this is what I see a lot with the participants of Clear, that they think I'm doing well because I'm drinking something that only has 1 calorie, but it draws the blood sugar level pretty low, and they get hungry and started snacking at that moment. And that's also my personal experience with diet sodas, that indeed when I start, I have a bit the same feeling when consuming alcohol. That also lowers the blood sugar level, that you get hungry and start to look around, where can I find the chips.
Yeah, usually something just like that, salty and horrible for you. You kind of mentioned it earlier in a conversation or in something that you were talking about. People have talked about the mental clarity and benefits. Those who aren't looking for health in regards to losing weight or turning disease around, a lot of people who experiment or look towards fasting are people for the mental health benefits, people trying to get an edge. And you, in fact, said your number one clientele are entrepreneurs. I was born and bred in Silicon Valley, so this is something very near and dear to my heart. But everybody who's anybody in the Valley is looking for a mental edge up, and so fasting is, it has a huge kingdom there. And a lot of people write in. And you personally, what have been the largest, if any? Have you received any mental benefits, and what are the largest mental benefits? And at what point in your fast? So how long are these fasts where you're kind of tapping into this wonderful mental benefits from fasting?
Yeah, good question. So basically, indeed, when I do intermittent fasting, I sort of bring my standard level a bit higher. So by implementing intermittent fasting, I become a bit healthier, and my brain fog I used to have in the past is cleared a lot. But when you start eating again, it sort of comes back again, I found out. So especially I found out when I do an extensive fast, and I think the mark is around between 1.5 days and 2 days. So a bit, let's say 40 hours. I found out that really the mental clarity kicks in. This is really the moment where I'm sharp as a knife, and I can do anything I want. That is the moment I excel. And I think that has to do a lot with the BDNF factor. That's what I read a lot about in science, that these chemicals are being released and actually boosts your mental clarity. From a biology perspective, definitely something also you need, because if you're going an extensive time without food, you need to be sharp when you are seeing food suddenly and you want to obtain it. So basically what I advise to people, and also in my personal experience, doing a fast for 48 hours is the moment where this really kicks in. On the other hand, I'm not saying that you should do a 48 hours fast weekly, because I definitely believe after fast comes feast. So also the food you put in your system again should be really healthy, and that's just as important as doing the fasting. But I found out that this tool in my toolbox of a longer term fast, like 48 hours or maybe 72, is something I implement at least once every quarter in my life, to really get the mental clarity back again.
Good. And let's tag on to that with the longer fasts. It's advisable from what I hear as well. I speak to people that do 48-hour fasts at least once a month to great effect as well, in particular with fighting off disease or non-health issues. I'm curious what we have a lot of people write in. What are your greatest sabotage factors? Having been an experienced faster, do you have triggers or things that immediately will sabotage, especially the longer fasts that require this kind of meditative approach to it? Do you yourself suffer from sabotage anymore? And if so, what are they?
Yeah. So for the shorter fast, like intermittent fasting, this never occurs, because I definitely cannot remember the last time I had a breakfast actually. But indeed, when doing a longer fast, then things are occurring. I think it's basically easier now in these times with the coronavirus because you don't go out as much often, of course. So you're confined to the house. On the other hand, I did speak to a lot of people that are binging on food since they are so much time in the house with also the gyms closed. On the other hand, I find out actually that not being around social events is really a good way to make sure that I don't get sabotaged on my fasting habits. Because indeed, you try to plan it a bit, the fasting, but then you normally find out that, oh, this person is going on holiday and wants to meet up, and yeah, then you can imagine a bit in your head, just drinking a glass of water over there, that might be not fun. And those things, I would say, especially the fun elements, and maybe also a bit sometimes the family aspect is the things that could sabotage it. On the family aspects, I am sometimes a bit afraid that if I do it too often, that my children who needs to grow and needs food, that they think, oh, okay, daddy's not eating, so I also won't eat. But that's all presumptions, I would say, because only once my son asked the questions, Dad, why are you not eating breakfast? Because I'm having my sandwich, why don't you have it? And I said, well, I'm big, I don't need to grow anymore. So when you don't need to grow anymore, you should limit your food intake a bit. And he understood it actually. But I would say the social events, to wrap it up, and indeed also maybe some family events to have a nice dinner together, that would be something to sabotage the approach.
Yeah, kids are a big one for me as well. I have 4 children, and I'm a devout cook for them, and it can get tricky on those longer 72-hour. It's actually past the 48. I'm fine, but there's something about that,
Yeah.
mid second day, which tends to be very common for people. And we have people who write in because you collect so much data and you go to so much information. Do you have specific websites or news outlets that you get a lot of your information regarding current studies or information being done in fasting? Is there one go-to site, or do you kind of just collect it from all over?
Yeah, I basically collect it from all over. So I have a colleague in Clear Health program who is a PhD in bioscience, and she knows the right media, of course, to get the scientific approved papers. So every time I'm writing a scientific paper, I always let her fact check if it's properly done, if it's backed up enough. So for me, basically how I start out is basically looking at some good YouTube content, because I think this is something that doesn't consume too much time. And if you are looking at the right outlets there, for instance, Diet Doctor is a good one, also a US one. So these are backed by real doctors or MDs, so trustworthy in that sense. And these outlets also link to the actual science. So I would say it would be a red flag when there's no link to a scientific article or reference. That would be something to avoid in that sense. But basically, I start with this bite-sized YouTube content and then started digging out in the mostly in the scientific papers.
Okay. Yeah. In regards to, this is an interesting one for you, being in Holland. What are the largest misconceptions that continually plague people who aren't used to the fasting idea or the fasting community that you run into time and again?
Yeah. I would say one of them is that still we believe here breakfast is the most important meal of the day. That's definitely something that everyone mimics. This is, of course, also being said by the outlets in the Netherlands. So there it's being said that you should never skip a meal. This is what especially our clients that also went to a dietitian often heard. So there a lot of work needs to be done, because I found out that many dietitians actually are not really open to these kinds of concepts like intermittent fasting or doing prolonged fasts. Eating lots of bread and potato. We are a people of eating lots of potato and bread. And I think it's not needed per se in your diet. If you can cope with it and if you like it, perfectly fine by me. If you choose a whole grain variant. But there's this kind of idea that you have to eat bread for breakfast and for lunch. That's basically what we do in the Netherlands. And sometimes also then adding the potatoes also for dinner. So this is really a carb overload for most people. And people still think that it's really healthy all of the time. And we are not, I think, very different to the culture maybe in the US, is that we sort of bring our lunches from home a lot. So there's not too many canteens and cafeterias around. We don't go out for lunch when we're at work. So of course the most portable thing to bring is a sandwich. And if you don't feel like prepping much time for it, because you can make a very healthy sandwich with avocado and tomato and so on. But yeah, you want convenience. That's what most people actually here want. And they slap on just some cheese and some margarine and whatever on the sandwich, and they really miss their vegetable intake.
Yeah. We have a lot of people who, like you, receive a lot of their information in their early fasting careers, in particular on YouTube and different places where people are speaking to it. Do you have any favorite YouTube personalities or influencers that you started out listening to or that you still listen to in regards to fasting?
Yeah. So a couple of them are Dr. Eric Berg and Dr. Nick Zarowski. They all play in the field of intermittent fasting mostly. Nick a bit more also in the extended fasting. Also, they have lots of knowledge about the ketogenic diet, which I definitely like. And besides that, it's also the content from, for instance, Jason Fung that I watch on YouTube. So those are mainly the recurring things. A bit also about Peter Attia, who is more on the subject matter of diabetes, but also found out very interesting stuff going on that intermittent fasting and extended fasting can be very beneficial for diabetic patients, whereas someone who is treating diabetic patients would normally refrain from that and would say, indeed, no, you should eat frequently because it also matches up with your medication.
Right. And finally, we have people who are wondering, you'll find humor most likely in this. There are a lot of fasting community groups here that actually mix in breath work exercises or breathing exercises. And Wim Hof, famous, the Iceman, is a Dutchman, is in combination with this. Have you heard of do people in Holland even do this? Is this just a United States thing in combining fasting efforts with like some of the Wim Hof breathing methods?
So the interesting part is that indeed Wim Hof is Dutch, and we know him, but I think he's even more popular in the US.
Yeah.
And basically people are trying it out. So people are just like in the Dutch culture are open to it, but are not cooperating or integrating that to a fasting lifestyle per se. So most of the time people are trying it out for a couple of times and then they leave it again. So I also have to give that same feedback to myself because I also tried it out and didn't find the way to make this a habit. I do say that's the thing about ice baths and cold showers are getting more traction lately. So I also see that some personalized gyms actually are popping up in the Netherlands that also include this technique, sometimes also with breathing. So it's just starting out. So I think you're a bit ahead in the US on these techniques.
Yeah, we collect people even if they're yours. He's I can't say that name without people getting very excited to talk about it. And cryotherapy has hit really big over here as well. So yeah, the ice baths, similar things. But it's amazing to me how many people are combining fasting and that breathing technique. There's you always come up with those microclimates. That's why micro-influencers are the trillion-dollar business that they are in the United States. You find these pockets of people that share all these things in tandem, and then marketing to them is like pure gold. So it's interesting to find out. Well, Jim, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you taking the time across the pond to talk with me and kind of explore your history and expertise with fasting.
Thank you, Patricia.
Absolutely. For everyone listening, we have been speaking with Jim Leseman. I always butcher. We were talking before we started recording, and I'm just still going with his word. Will you say your last name for me, Jim?
Jim Leseman.
Leseman. I was almost there. He's head of nutrition. You can find out more at the clearhealthprogram.com. You can find out more on that website, as well as www.ketoking.nl. So yes, dank u wel, Jim, for speaking with me today. And from all of us at Patricia Kathleen Podcast, thank you for listening. And remember to be responsible, practice compassion, and always bet on yourself. Sláinte.